Hey everyone. In the last video, we took a look at some of the bizarre Tetris sequels released in the late 80s and 90s. Some of the games that defined a really odd era of the series before it finally figured itself out. If you haven't seen that video, go watch it now. Today though, we're going to continue through the series looking at the games released without Alexei Pajitnov's direct influence. Games from roughly 1996 and onwards. As a very quick recap, Alexei Pajitnov made Tetris in 1985. He then made a few weird sequels, and the puzzle game genre had a bunch of similar but odd releases. The original Tetris is by all means perfect and is a crowning example of Bushnell's law. Games should be easy to learn and difficult to master. That's really all you need to know from the last video.
Warning: I am terrible at Tetris and all puzzle games. Please understand before watching further. Thank you.
We're gonna dive in soon, but before we can do that, I need to drop a ton of context for what's to come. And we can start with a new face in the Tetris brand, Hank Rogers. If Pajitnov is Eminem, then Hank Rogers is Dr. Dre. Rogers is the one responsible for getting Tetris as a pack-in title for the Game Boy. He secured the rights for Tetris before it was big and distributed the game until it was huge. If it wasn't for him, Tetris may have very well died with the Soviet Union when it collapsed. Now, I'd love to tell you that that was the whole story, it would be incredibly simple, but the actual history is way crazier than that, and it's worth covering in a little more detail. Strap in, because this is going to get complex. Originally, Pajitnov had made Tetris under the Soviet agency Elorg, and they held the rights to the series. Because of Soviet-era BS, Pajitnov was just a company employee and didn't get any royalties or ownership for his work. And towering over that is the Soviet Union itself, which is having some trust issues and not really paying attention to where Tetris will go. So, in 1987, a man named Robert Stein tried to get licensing rights and went to the Soviet Academy of Science to do so. They directed him to Pajitnov, who loosely said that there would be interest in a deal, and Robert Stein took that as an actual legal deal for complete licensing rights. Remember, Elorg holds all the rights. Stein then went to a British company named Mirrorsoft and sub-licensed the game to them, where they made a version for PC. Then Elorg calls Mirrorsoft and says that you don't have any rights to use the game. So Stein goes to Elorg and says, I didn't even know you guys existed. They work out an actual deal to license Tetris on the computer market. But then, Mirrorsoft approached Tengen, which is actually half of Atari after they split in the 80s, and asked them to make a home console version of the game. Tengen believes that Mirrorsoft has the rights, so they start making their own version for the NES. Here's where Rogers comes in, who, through a Tengen rep, meets with Nintendo to make a Famicom and Game Boy version. And then, Rogers, Stein, and Kevin Maxwell of Mirrorsoft all meet with Elorg within the span of a week to get rights. Stein and Maxwell are both just sleazy businessmen trying to get a leg up, Elorg is trying to figure out what the hell is happening, and the only two people I mentioned who actually gave a damn about Tetris were Pajitnov and Rogers, who became very good friends. Ultimately, Rogers got official home console rights. But Tengen had already made their version, so they sued Nintendo trying to get the rights back, and during this, Kevin Maxwell's father calls up Gorbachev asking him to revoke Nintendo's rights. You should also look up who Kevin Maxwell's sister is, because how could this story get any weirder? Tengen loses the court case almost immediately, giving Nintendo the home console rights, but not the arcade rights. Tengen originally had them, but now Sega took those, and now somehow, Sega thought they had console rights too and pitched a Genesis version, which was ultimately turned down, leaving about 10 copies of what is now one of the rarest games ever made. The whole story is completely insane and leaves a trail of about 5 versions from different developers. Jumping forward a few years, the Soviet Union collapses and Elorg is privatized. That ultimately led to the original contract expiring, putting the rights to Tetris in Pajitnov's hand. He teamed up with Hank Rogers in 1996 to form the Tetris Company, now responsible for all licensing of the Tetris brand. You don't need to understand the whole story, but it is clear as day that nobody was concerned with consistency or brand image within the series. Different versions, different developers, and all of that is taking place while Pajitnov and others are making new sequels. There was so much ambiguity and it became hard to tell what's official and where the series actually was. It's why I find the history so interesting. It really is just the most enigmatic game series ever. But now there's one company with all the rights and it's led by 2 people who actually understand the game. And in order to fix the chaos, tighten the image of the franchise, and streamline the licensing process, they create the Tetris Guideline, a yearly set of rules to ensure the quality and consistency of Tetris games. While it's often cited that Tetris Worlds from 2001 was the first game to use it, it was actually made in 1996 according to Rogers in several interviews. The guidelines essentially just standardize the gameplay of Tetris. They're made so you can pick up the game and play Tetris on any device and understand it immediately. This button should always do this piece should always rotate like this, and so on. And that is a great idea. It shows a profound understanding of the original game. You can't beat perfection. The original is perfect. It's incredibly easy to learn and impossible to master. The guideline standardizes that 5-second learning process so that in every case, it is incredibly easy to learn. Also, a quick note, whenever I say the original version, I'm not referring to the original Electronica 60 game, I just mean the original gameplay. I use NES Tetris as the example, and there's a bit in the last video too. I know NES Tetris wasn't the first one, it's just a really good example of the gameplay. Anyways, I have to speed up because I'm 6 minutes into this video and haven't even touched a game yet. While a set of guidelines might sound super limiting to a developer, it's not supposed to be an imposing rule over Tetris. It is strict, yes, and the company will send you to hell with legal fees if you use the brand without permission. But the whole thing basically just makes third-party licensing easier and faster. If you want to make a new Tetris game and push the brand forward, sure, follow these rules and make something new. Or, if you want to port Tetris to this console, sure, follow these rules and make sure it plays well. Makes sense, right? So fortunately, or unfortunately for me I guess, the age of Weltris and Faces Tris 3 would likely be over. But the early years of the guideline were not so strict, at least nowhere near as strict as they are today. The series was in a bit of a limbo where they were still trying to see where it could and would go, but didn't quite figure it out yet. So let's take a look at a game from 1998, 2 years after the guideline was made, and see if we can find any influence from it. Tetris 4D, released in Japan only for the Dreamcast. Now based on the title, you'd think that this game is going to be some crazy ass version of Tetris with a 4-dimensional playing field, insane rotations, and incomprehensible pieces. But no. This is just regular Tetris. In 2 dimensions, not 4 dimensions. It's good to know that the Tetris guideline doesn't affect any of the confusing names, they still don't make sense. This game is just Tetris. They removed the Russian imagery of the early games and went with an industrial look instead. The backgrounds are nice rendered scenes, but the text has this disgusting bubble font. That, mixed with the odd shades for the actual pieces, makes a rather unappealing game. The 4D part of the name comes from the multiplayer, which includes a 4-player battle version. That's kind of cool, although it was done several times in the past. Immediately though, you can see that this game is proof of the guideline. It's a Tetris game that's just that. Tetris. It has the normal blocks, normal mechanics, everything you'd want to see out of a Tetris game from 1998. However, just looking at it, I don't think anyone would call this a good port. Despite the gameplay being preserved, the art style sucks, it's clunky, and there's no sense of satisfaction from clearing lines. What this means is that if a Tetris game is going to be a basic port to a new console, it has to do something about those 3 features to succeed. Art style, control, and reward all have to be tuned properly. The only way to build upon the original is to either polish it to an extreme degree or innovate in a completely new way. So let's look at another port that does the latter. This is Tetris 64, which also released in 1998 in Japan only. This port has largely fallen into obscurity, but it happens to have a pretty unique version of the game. Tetris 64 is compatible with the N64 biosensor, a peripheral that plugs into your controller and clips onto your ear to measure your heart rate. The device was compatible with one game, this being it. Now, every source on the internet will tell you that it came bundled with the game, but that is not true. There is not a single documented case of the game actually including the sensor, you had to buy it separately, and I have confirmed this with several magazines from the time. Nowadays they are very difficult to find. I was actually recently in Japan, and I thought it'd be cool if I could find one for this video. I searched maybe 20 book-offs, and although I found the game complete in box, I never saw the sensor. Probably because it sold so poorly. I really wanted it for the video, but my only other option was buying it online, and they go for steep prices in the US. I hate to say it, but sorry, I won't actually be testing it myself. Thankfully, plenty of people have documented its use online. The game consists of 3 modes: Normal, Giga, and Bio Tetris. Normal is just normal. I couldn't tell why it looked off to me until I realized that the playing field is taller than normal. The guideline says that it should be 20 blocks tall with a buffer, whereas 64 is 22 blocks tall with a buffer. There's also this weird thing where the blocks overlap when moving over each other. I get why. The pieces move continuously, so it gives you more time to slide a piece into place before it lands. But to me, it breaks the normal convention of everything being square. Giga Tetris is unique. It adds in giant pieces along with the normal ones, and upon clearing a line, the big ones will break off into small pieces. It's neat, but really gimmicky. Maybe it's a skill issue, but I never felt that I could do anything meaningful with the big pieces. The learning curve is just too steep for me. And lastly, Bio Tetris. So like I said, I don't actually have the device, but the way it worked is that it would plug into the back of your controller. Here I'm just going to use a controller pack. And out of that would be a wire which had a little clip at the end. I'm just going to use this bag clip and string. So you'd attach that to your ear. Yeah, so this would read your heart rate and it would go into the game and affect the mode. I read online that the heart rate sensor itself is medically accurate, which I find so funny because this is just the most useless peripheral ever, or at least it was used in the least amount of games that I know of. And I also found out that the protocol for it is completely documented too. It basically just sends out 32 byte blocks of 3 when there's no heart rate and 0 when there is a pulse. And I thought it would be perfect after the garbage I went through with Face's Tris 3 to make my own heart rate sensor that I could use in an emulator, but I deemed that project unworthy after reading what people said about it. I'm going to paraphrase from several sources, so take my review with a grain of salt, but what most people said is that the device doesn't really do anything. I always thought this mode would change the speed of the blocks based on your heart rate. That makes perfect sense to me. But actually it'll just send out more complex pieces if your heart rate is high and simple ones if it's low. It's incredibly gimmicky because it's changing the underlying gameplay based on something that you have control over. You can calm yourself down when you see a crazy piece. But suppose it was what I had said. When normal Tetris gets fast, your heart naturally starts racing. It'd be really cool if it made you change your playstyle based on how well you can keep your composure. But no, it just gives you new pieces. And as far as your actual heart rate is concerned, you'd need to have just ran a marathon or be in a coma for it to have any meaningful effect. Since I don't have it, I can't actually say if it's fun or not, but I will at least give it the praise that it's a refreshing feature to see and definitely unique. As for the game itself, it suffers from the same style issues that Tetris 4D faced. The music, which you've been hearing, is cheerful and glee, 2 things I never associate with Tetris. And these backgrounds? JPEG as all hell. Why even add pictures at that point if they're going to be this compressed? It's another rough port. I don't know if this game was made under the guideline. I'm inclined to say no because of the few rules it breaks, but I'm just guessing. I'd say don't bother with Tetris 64. If you really want Tetris on this console, play the new Tetris. This one included a few features which would become guideline staples. The hold feature, seeing the next few pieces, the ghost piece, and some rotation mechanics. There's also this Disney version, but I don't like this one. Let's move on. So we've seen some basic ports now, but what about the new games? Did those manage to push the series forward? Let's take a look at Tetrisphere, an N64 exclusive released in 1997. Tetrisphere, in my opinion, was the first good attempt at making Tetris work in 3 dimensions. Yes, 3D Tetris did well, but I think the Virtual Boy inherently held it back too much, and Weltris is just not the same. I've seen gameplay of this game for the longest time, probably since the early 2010s, and I was always heavily intrigued by it, but had no clue how it worked. It looks so foreign. The basic idea of spherical Tetris is just hard to wrap your head around, but upon playing it, it's really not what it looks like. You still drop pieces with the goal of clearing blocks, but the main objective is to clear a large enough opening for the Tetrisphere to escape. These guys are the Tetrispheres. whoever they are. I will give them that this is the first Tetramino character that doesn't look terrible. That's all you'd think it is, but the final piece is that you can move pieces that are already placed. These purple blocks are the ones you can move through, and that lets you connect pieces of the same type and clear them with the ones you drop. Like I said, it's not really Tetris because it only shares the falling pieces and their shapes, but it lends itself to the exact same style of gameplay and choices in playstyle. You can play slow and build up enormous chains to rack up points, or fast drop every piece and clear small chains when they appear. Or just bypass that entirely and move blocks around to make craters. Despite not having the same gameplay, it is certainly as mentally challenging as the original. You can learn all of this in a tutorial mode, which is usually a bad sign for a puzzle game, but it's done fairly well and gets you up to speed fast. Stylistically, Tetrisphere makes a decisive choice on a futuristic techno look. The backgrounds, music, and sound effects are all really well done, and they combine to make a quite polished product. I do think it'd be interesting to see a version of this game with Russian iconography, but this is good too. It's also worth noting that this is one of the few N64 games to utilize the D-pad. If you're using a smaller controller like the HoriPad Mini here, you're gonna want to switch to an original. The other Tetris games for this console also use it, and it's just kind of neat to think that this whole side of the controller was basically only used in a few games. Now, if you compare Tetris and Tetrisphere, they're pretty similar on the surface, and I think that leads to a fairly basic but very important question. Why isn't Tetrisphere popular? Why haven't I seen a new version of it, a tournament, or really any coverage on the level that the original gets, despite it being in the same vein? Not even just Tetrisphere, but any Tetris sequel or puzzle game alike. And I do have an answer to that, but I want to introduce the next game before explaining. As for the reception of Tetrisphere, Pajitnov acknowledges that it's fairly confusing, but specifically likes the intellectual aspect of it, stating that he still enjoys it from time to time today. Rogers, on the other hand, does not approve of this game, to this day. He said in an interview from 2025, "That is not Tetris, and it breaks the cardinal rule of don't hide any pieces from the player." I can see where he's coming from, but I don't know if that's fair for a game that doesn't follow the same rules as the original. Tetrisphere lets you move pieces around, so it's not a cardinal rule for Tetrisphere, it's a cardinal rule for Tetris. One might say a Tetris guideline. But regardless, we're going to come back to Tetrisphere soon. Let's introduce the other weird puzzle game for N64, Wetrix. First of all, this is not an official Tetris game. It shares a very similar name, but was not made under any association to the Tetris brand or guideline. It just happens to be a puzzle game with falling blocks, and the developers were heavily inspired by it. Wetrix released in 1998 with versions for N64, Dreamcast, PC, and even the Game Boy Color. This game is a bit hard to digest, but it's basically a 3D water landscape version of Tetris, where instead of clearing lines, you aim to create and destroy pools of water. It's easier to just show gameplay than it is to try explaining every part, but I will attempt to do so. First, you're given some pieces which raise the elevation of the ground. These build the pools which will hold water. Then the water itself comes, and you have to place it without creating leaks or spilling over the edge. When this meter hits the top, you've spilled too much and the round ends. Then the game will throw you pieces which lower the elevation, and these let you connect separate pools to gain points. There are then bombs which you must place which create holes for you to patch, and the meteor piece which evaporates any water it hits and is how you gain points. You would think that the goal is to make one giant crater that takes up the whole screen, but really it's a balancing game where you have to keep the size, spacing, and depth of everything tuned to allow for the most evaporation and rebuilding. Right off the bat though, this game is far more complex than any previous one I've mentioned. You have to take some serious time to fully understand each piece, what it does, and how they all interact. That's a big ask for a puzzle game because ideally, it should be pick up and play with very little learning time. I know I've said it a lot, but I can't stress how important it is. Easy to learn, difficult to master. That's how it should be. The developers must have also understood how difficult it was because just like Tetrisphere, there's a tutorial. Except this time, good luck. I spent over 2 hours on the tutorial levels and I couldn't even finish the last one. It's so difficult to learn. And even if this is just a skill issue, that is too much to ask of a casual player. If you can look past the difficulty, the gameplay is absolutely engaging. There's a really unique rhythm to the game once you understand each piece, and the cycle of building and destroying pools is definitely a standout from many other puzzle games. In spite of that though, I think that rhythm kind of locks your playstyle. In the original Tetris, regardless of what you're given or your current circumstances, you still have complete control over how you play. You're not forced to make certain choices to continue, so when your stack is high, you could keep building. You could just clear lines at the top. And that extreme freedom in playstyle is a big reason why Tetris is so engaging. But to even play Wetrix, you have to follow a strict loop. When you're given a water block, you have to make a pool out of it. And when the next piece is also a water block, you better have enough space for it, because you will lose almost immediately if you put it anywhere else. It's limiting, and that's just no fun. Let's take a look at the Game Boy Color version, see how well they adapted the water graphics for a 2D console. Oh god. I do have to hand it to them because this is a fully working port of the original, but I'd get a headache after about 3 minutes of playtime. How are you supposed to tell what's what on this small of a screen? There's not much else to say about this version. So going back to the question I posed with Tetrisphere, why aren't these games more popular? What really sets Tetris apart from the rest? It's very easy to label any game with falling blocks a Tetris clone, but at the end of the day, they're all just puzzle games. If you can learn them, progress, and it's enjoyable, then it should have the potential to be as big as the original. And there are probably 10 good answers I could give, but the simplest one is just the learning curve. Like I said, it should be easy to learn, difficult to master. Anyone can find major enjoyment and intellectual stimulation from playing Tetris at any skill level, but if it takes me over an hour for a tutorial in Wetrix, clearly it's not going to hold the same appeal. If there's even a little overhead in just playing the game, the lowest possible aspect of a video game, it's really unlikely it'll go anywhere. And even if the game is more fun than Tetris once you've learned it, there's an even smaller chance that there are people who share that skill. That's why games like Tetris, Puyo Puyo, or even the game Pack Attack was based on, still have major communities, whereas Weltris is unknown. I mean, think back to those games from Microsoft Puzzle Collection. We still see them today in the form of mobile games because they are so easy to learn. It makes sense. As for these two though, they're still fun games, all things considered. The water graphics on Wetrix are pretty cool, and it's a really unique concept. Tetrisphere is also polished to an incredible level. I'd recommend trying them if you're even a little interested, Tetrisphere especially. For our final title of the video, let's jump to 2001. I said before that Tetris Worlds is incorrectly regarded as the first game to follow the guideline, but I think what they're trying to say is that Tetris Worlds was the first game to be completely guideline compliant. That's my guess, but Tetris Worlds features almost every staple mechanic we see today. In my mind, it's a bit of a turning point for the series, the point where they finally figured it out, where they completely understood what it takes to make a good port. And that is in no part thanks to this game's newest feature and debatably worst, story mode, because everyone wanted to know why we were stacking blocks to begin with. So let's close this video out by looking at Tetris Worlds for the PS2. Oh god, what is this? Who the hell thought this up? And what's wrong with you? You can't personify a Tetris piece, it just doesn't work. So the opening cutscene starts and we see this fish Tetris thing walk up to these monoliths. Looks like something out of Neon Genesis. And then he starts playing Tetris, and eventually he just says F that and rolls out of there. What is going on? And then it actually does turn into Evangelion, and the guys from SEAL tell us that the Tetramino's home galaxy is gonna supernova soon. So they need to relocate using these things called Tetrions, which are planetary gates, I guess. And that lets them avoid the third impact. They send out a bunch of these guys to open up the gates by playing Tetris. Good story, guys, bet it took you a while to think of that one. The manual explains it in much more detail, but it gets way dumber over text. The information menu has a museum put together by an organic species that actually think they invented Tetris. You can find out their version of the history of Tetris. They also have all kinds of theories on how the Tetris variants work. Personally, we Minos think that they take themselves much too seriously. Is that a joke? You guys are the ones that came up with this shit. If you were gonna take the story that seriously, you should have just stuck Pagitnov in there himself. Pagitnov, the god of Tetris, got bored one day and started messing around with evolution. That's how he made that mutated Tetris fish, a man-made horror beyond comprehension. See, I made a better story than they did. Anyways, there are 6 versions of Tetris for you to play, and each one colonizes another planet to potentially inhabit.
Go for a Tetris. Single.
What is this? Who is this goddamn woman whispering in my ear when I clear a line? This is insane. It's a Tetris game. Why are there so many weird design choices? It's just so out of place. As for the gameplay itself, it's a good version of Tetris. It has all the staples, but it's pretty lackluster otherwise. This was the first Tetris game to introduce infinite spin, where the lock delay on a piece can be reset by rotating it. That's a pretty divisive feature, but it's commonplace nowadays. The PS2 D-pad isn't very comfortable for playing Tetris. That's something to keep in mind when making a port, that controller design can dictate the feel of the game itself. As for the modes, Cascade Tetris makes it so loose blocks fall down upon clearing lines. It's easy but fun. Hotline Tetris only gives you points for clearing specific lines. It's stupid. Fusion Tetris is weird. You have to fuse individual blocks with this special piece at the bottom. I don't understand it. Square Tetris adds the feature of getting points from making squares, and Sticky Tetris is Cascade Tetris, but connecting pieces of the same type awards you points. Now the game and manual do not make this clear, but to actually progress, you need to raise your rank for each mode. Guess where you see your current rank? Is it here? Maybe is it this number? No, it's this number on your character, and whenever the freaky ass woman whispers,
Rank up.
you have to manually quit the round and you'll see the planets become more colonized. Once you reach rank 11 on each mode, the story finishes. That's it. You see this cryptic ass cutscene where the third impact starts, and then the planet just magically repairs itself and becomes Earth, or some other planet, I don't know. Cool. I don't even know what to say. I wanted to talk about this game's effect on the Guideline and series as a whole, but I'm so thrown off by the design that it's not even worth doing that anymore. Compared to some of the games from the last video, take Wordtris. Even though I think that game is creepy, it's still decisively styled. Those games were odd, but I was never left thinking, how do you even think this up? But Tetris Worlds is just f***ing weird. A stupid ass story with these Cyclops Tetris freaks and this creepy ass woman telling me to
Go for a Tetris.
well, how about go f*** yourself? It's such a mismatch of design choices over an otherwise basic port of Tetris. Forget what I said last video, this is the worst to come. I'd rather play Faces Tris 3 or Hatris any day over this.
Hank, tell me it wasn't you. I beg of you, please.
So, what now? In part 1, I said that this series would be 2, maybe 3 parts long. There will be a third part, but it won't really be about the ugly games. With the introduction of the Guideline, the Tetris company ultimately tightened their grip just enough so that the overall direction and outlook of the series would follow the original game. That's not to say that there aren't bad ports or other weird games, but the series has largely chosen its image, which is certainly not ugly. For part 3, we're going to take a look at the arcade ports of Tetris, specifically the TGM series, and maybe a few newer games to close it out. I'm very excited for it, but that video won't be done for a long time, possibly over a year. If you know anything about TGM, it's the difficulty. It's really difficult. And I don't feel comfortable making a video on a game that I physically can't play because it's too difficult. So whenever I am good enough, I'll be back for part 3, where we can hopefully make it full circle and explain what it takes to make a good Tetris sequel. It's a bit of a cop-out for me to end on this note, but I will be back. It'll be worth it. Until then, tune in next time. Bye.